So hey everybody, my name is Chris Williams. I'm a cloud architect slash cloud therapist. I work for GreenPages Technologies. I'm also actually a newly minted AWS hero as of a couple of weeks ago. That was a pretty neat that AWS shot that my way. But that being said, I am still cloud agnostic, as you will hear in this presentation. As we get into this, we try to couch this as a cage match, but you'll see what this really turns into. And as I said before, we highly encourage a lot of audience participation. Duke's up. Um, we encourage a lot of audience participation. We've done this a couple of times, so we have a list of questions that have been given to us in the past, and we can revert to that, but ideally we're answering the questions of the people that are in the audience. Mr. Barter.
Well, hello. Thank you, Mr. Williams. My name is David Barter, and I am the Senior Practice Director and Technology Evangelist here at GreenPages for all things Microsoft related. So I essentially overrule Chris on all projects that he does. It's a lot of fun.
It's true.
So, just an example of something I'm working on, Chris, you can share it with them when we start talking public cloud. Currently working on a project with a little company called ButcherBox. If any of you are familiar with them or a subscriber to their organic grass-fed, grass-finished products, we are building an AI ML situation, essentially an AI algorithm and machine learning process to balance their product that is in their 4 distribution centers against their demand plan so that people are getting exactly what they expect when they expect it. Right now, that is a manual job. Someone's doing that 6, 8, 10 hours a day, and we're going to turn it into something that gets done in about 30 seconds. Chris,
And
what are
to
you
clarify,
working on?
well, I was going to say, to clarify, is that in AWS or is that in Azure?
That is absolutely in Azure.
All right. So I do a lot of, I'm going to say data center migrations, but I also do a lot of DR replatforming and re-architecture work. I historically came from a VMware background. I spent 20 years doing VMware virtualization and data center builds using virtualization technology. So I'm particularly good at taking that paradigm and connecting it to a public cloud, whether it be Azure or AWS, and start moving ones and zeros in that direction. In fact, my current project, which has been obfuscated and all the names have been removed, is actually doing exactly that to Azure right now.
So I think the purpose of why we're here today is to share with you our perception on public cloud. We here at Green Pages represent, as you heard, both sides of the spectrum, and it's an interesting conversation because even though we consider ourselves to be both sides of the spectrum, we oftentimes are playing in both sides of the spectrum. So it becomes less of a us versus them and more of a how do we do this in the right solution for the customer. Sometimes that solution is simply AWS makes the most sense, and I acquiesce that, and Chris is very happy and he jumps up and down. And sometimes it's Azure, and I have a small party, and Chris sulks.
And I
But
cry.
sometimes
I
it's a
cry.
multi-cloud environment where we're trying to find how does a customer that wants to move out of a data center into a multi-cloud environment, how do they consume that? How do they go about rationalizing what workloads go where? From my perspective, I look at the public cloud as being important because it gives many things, which I'm sure you're all aware of, which is why you're AWS fans, is flexibility. It's response time flexibility and capabilities that you wouldn't normally have inside of a data center because of constraints with IT debt or technology debt that you've incurred or customers have incurred or yourselves have incurred during the course of trying to live inside of an expedient data center or something like that, where the cost to expand is oftentimes unreachable, or the speed in which you wish to do it. I think we look at this oftentimes as well across our customer base as and our personal experiences, and even when I spend time with Microsoft, as a solution for solving a problem and less about a cloud war. We have lots of cloud wars here, don't we, Chris?
Um, Yes,
Yes,
we have heated conversations
we do.
about what things work best in which solutions. But I think that some of the quote unquote war piece of that is our familiarity with our slices of it, and then trying to come to consensus between not only you and I, but also with the customer use case.
Right.
So David and I are both architects first, and what we like to do is have a number of tools in our tool belt. So when we're addressing these things, is it WSUS? Is it SSM? Is it some other third party tool? It all depends, and this is the trite joke about this is it all depends upon the use case. But that is a very prescient statement in regards to whenever somebody asks me, is AWS the right cloud for me? It depends. It depends on a huge number of variables, and we're going to try to filter down some of those variables today and try to coalesce them into digestible bites as you guys are eating. But before well, do we want to ask the audience if they have any questions, or did you want to add some more stuff, Mr. Barter?
No, no, let's ask away. This is their
Okay.
meeting.
So this is the part where we want to make sure that we normally we're actually in the audience and we can just walk around and irritate you guys and have fun with this. This is our first time doing this remotely. So what we'd like to do now is encourage the audience to ask questions about, the differences between Azure and AWS, or picking a cloud in general, or business paradigms, or security options, or any questions that you have that pertain to the cloud. So Mr.
Yep, we have a
Calvin, how do
mic.
you guys do it?
Yeah,
Do you have a mic? Do you mic
yeah,
people
we do.
up?
We have a
Or?
microphone. Matt's got the microphone. If anyone has a question, for them to hear you, you need to speak into the microphone, and so we also get it on the recording.
Right.
So, anyone want to kick off with their first like dying question about like why Azure over AWS or AWS over Azure? All right, get back to
Burning
the room.
questions.
Hey guys, my name is Ben.
Hey, Ben.
Between Azure and AWS, one of the things that I've said when people have asked me what's the difference and why would you choose one or the other, I want to see if you agree with me from what I've heard and what you've seen in the field as well. People seem to choose Azure more often because Microsoft's enterprise agreements seem to have credits available. They'll say, hey, you've been a customer of ours for a long time. We'll give you some free Azure credits to move over and give it a try. How about it? And that's why I've seen several customers move over to Azure versus any of the other public clouds. I'm kind of curious if you guys see the same thing. Is that still true? Is that kind of old news? What do you think about that?
Mr. Barty, you want to go first?
I will. So great question, Ben. Thanks for taking the plunge and being the first. It's always the most difficult one to be. I would tell you that up until probably July of this year, that was very much Microsoft's play. And again, I work extremely closely with Microsoft all the way to Redmond, sales excellence in Redmond, and down into the local offices up and down the East Coast. So when customers were being sold enterprise agreements or large licensing agreements, and Azure or even Office 365 was a new thing, the reps were given the ability to say, "Hey, look, we're going to give you $1,200 a month in Azure credit, free credit. Use it to what you want. Once you go over, you're going to have to start paying, and we'll true up at the end of the year." Coming into what's known as FY20, which Microsoft starts on July 1, that is probably less of a practice nowadays as it is financial incentive coming from Microsoft for an organization to consume Azure in a way that makes sense. So, one of the things I would say is you've got a project you want to lift up and build your first SQL as a database inside of the Azure platform side of the house. Azure has two sides, as you know: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. And Microsoft has funding mechanisms now versus free here, take it free the first time. I'm sort of the drug dealer of cloud,
First, it's free.
first taste is free, and they incent you to do it that way. So what you could be seeing and will be seeing moreover for the next year is organizations like GreenPages or Microsoft or any of your other partners or peers that you work with saying, "Hey, I've got $15,000 for 7 days worth of work. We can use this to get you built up and running inside of it." So Microsoft feels, and I feel, and I see more acceptance of it in that manner versus, hey, here's just $1,200, go build what you want. Oftentimes that leads to issues within the customer, issues within your own organization of massive sprawl very quickly. One of the things you all know in public cloud is that it's really easy to build stuff. It's much harder to pay for it after you've built it when what you thought was $2,000 turns out to be five. Chris, what do you think?
I do agree. I do agree with the EA question. So I didn't know about the change in July about how they're shifting the credits. That has been an incentive for people that were previously predisposed towards leaning to Azure to pick them anyway. A lot of times, what I'm seeing from the customers. So the way things go down at GreenPages is if a customer is predisposed to talk about Azure, they get funneled to Barter. If they're predisposed to talk about AWS, they get funneled to me. And then on the back end, Barter and I have a talk about that to decide if that's really the best course of action for them in an ideal world. So we do have our biases based upon what we're seeing internally from the funnel of customers that we're seeing, but from my perspective, what I'm seeing is the people that will get the EA credits, and this is going to kind of segue into a little bit of a multi-cloud conversation that we're going to have as we wrap that up. Is they'll take and consume the EA credits, but it will also then depend upon where they want to have data sovereignty. So if Azure doesn't have a thing in the place where they need it, and when I say a thing, I mean a service or a particular flavor of something within Azure that is not available in the flavor that they want it to consume it in the right region, then that kind of opens up Pandora's box in regards to, well, do we pick AWS? Do we pick Azure? And I'm also noticing that and again, this might be my own personal bias, but people that are interested in Python particularly tend to consume AWS more because of the really rich SDK found in Boto 3 and all of the other mechanisms that Calvin can go on ad nauseum about from the Python perspective. So it's a bit of personal preference. It's a bit of internal company politics as to where the company wants to head to begin in general. And then thanks, Calvin. And then we'll just take it from there. And then we grab the use cases. So I come from a TOGAF architecture background. It's all based upon requirements, risks, assumptions, and constraints. You grab the requirements, you highlight the risks, you delineate the assumptions, and then you call it the constraints that your design is built upon. And then at the end of the day, the best design wins, and the best tool to implement that design is picked in a perfect world.
Well, I don't come from that background. I come from the Microsoft background that all our products are exactly what you need all the time, every day, every night. Regardless of whether you need them or not, we still think you need them. So
for everybody that doesn't know Barter, he's being very facetious right now.
I'm being very facetious right now. So question from Chris Peak to all the panelists. Are there general trends, themes from a technology perspective where you find Azure is better suited over AWS or vice versa? I think that's a great question, Chris. I appreciate you asking that. I will tell you that of late, where I see the shift beginning to take place is in the application development world. As Microsoft has pushed in and really tried to distance itself from AWS as an infrastructure as a service provider and more of a platform as a service provider, they have built technology stacks inside of the Azure platform around Kubernetes, for instance. So AKS or Azure Kubernetes Service. And the whole concept of servicizing technology platforms that you would normally build in your environment. So you would normally build either directly in AWS or an AWS similar service or on-prem a Kubernetes environment. You would build containerization inside of your environment. What Microsoft has started to do that really differentiates, in my opinion, from AWS is to really double down on the bet that services like DevOps, services like automated pipeline interaction with DevOps, services like Kubernetes are now something that you consume versus build. And where I see a lot of our customers going from the application development side is abandoning those tool sets, and not necessarily in the tool set in general, but in the practice of deployment of those tool sets, and really taking advantage of the services, because then they don't have to have Kubernetes people on staff, someone that's constantly updating the Kubernetes stack. That is handled by Microsoft if you so choose to do it. So I see that. So the other place that I'll see, and then I'll turn this over to Chris, is really in the data side. As Microsoft has said, listen, we love SQL Server. We love SQL Server. It's paid our bills for years as a traditional license stack. What we really see is that there is more opportunity for an organization to take advantage of what we call the Lego bricks of data, items like Data Factory, Data Lake Gen 2, all of those necessary pieces, and build a very unstructured, however, very flexible and controlled, if you can believe it, both being flexible and being able to control it, data environment that allows you to take in multiple feeds from anywhere, any API that's out there, feed that into this very fluid data pool, and then after you create that data schema, then lift it up and put it into a database of your choice. Doesn't have to be SQL. It can be a MariaDB. It can be a CosmoDB. It looks at what you're trying to do with it and allows you to choose the right database structure for the application. So that's what I see the big difference between Azure and where people are moving technology workloads today. I don't know if either one is better suited for the other. I think they're different tacks, and it depends upon I would say it definitely depends upon the experience of your organization. Mm-hmm. Right, Chris?
Yeah, and I would also add that it also depends upon how the end user is used to consuming it.
Right.
So it's very disingenuous to say that people that love Microsoft should go to Azure, and people that love Linux and non-Microsoft things should go to AWS. Both clouds. So right now we're in a battle of inches. As soon as Azure comes out with something or a service or an offering, AWS is right there, and vice versa. As soon as AWS comes out with something, Microsoft is right there. So if we put a pin in the services today, yes, we could say this A is better than B, C is better than D from the different cloud sides, but how you consume it is the most important piece. What are you going to be using it for? How close do you need to be to it? What level of scalability do you want? What are your RPOs and RTOs? What is your SLA to yourself and to your own customers? And once you've gotten to that piece, then your trend, your general theme that Chris was talking about, kind of speaks to itself. That being said, if somebody says no, I don't want SQL, no, I don't want Exchange, no, I don't want any of that stuff, I do lean towards AWS, not because of bias, but because of the longevity of the platform within AWS. And that's not really fair to say, because AWS has been around longer, chronologically speaking. But that's my go-to until I get proven wrong by some use case along the way. Don't raise your hand. What are you doing? Put your hand down. No, if a use case speaks to a more Azure leaning thing, then I will pivot to that. David is very inflexible and bald, so he always says no, Azure must be the right way to go, and that's kind of his thing.
Well, I think you lean to AWS because it's easier for you to spell.
There are fewer letters, so that makes me feel better.
I have an issue with that.
It's true.
It's true. It's very true. The height, the tallness of you rarefies the air, so it's hard to spell.
All right, so everybody I'm 6'8", and Mr. Barter is not.
I'm 5'5".
I'm not going to pull the picture up. Never mind.
It's gross. You don't want to see it.
We make fun of each other constantly. Whenever we get on stage together, it is hilarious. It's the Laurel and Hardy show. Doesn't carry over as much.
Insinuating I'm fat?
No.
No? Okay, fair enough. So one other question people ask us oftentimes in these conversations when we have them are, how do we look at the Google Cloud platform? Is Google Public Cloud, is that solution competitive yet? My feeling is generally no, based on where you're at. It's obviously late to the game. I think the one thing that Google brings to the world that we've yet to see the effect of, but will fairly quickly, is the analytics engine. I think if you look at where everybody has value, from an Azure perspective, I believe that the value that Microsoft brings to the table is the services integration piece. The fact that you can have an Active Directory up there, the fact that you can use that Active Directory to drive roles-based administration inside of Azure, the fact that Azure can access and be part of your file storage organization with OneDrive for Business. There's so much integration in the stack of applications that Microsoft has offered between these public cloud entities that there's a lean there. But what I really think is that Google Public Cloud, that analytics engine and what it's going to be able to do and the speed at which it's going to be able to drive the consumption and the rationalization of very, very, very bespoke data is going to be certainly something to reckon with on both the AWS and the Azure side. And I think it literally gives Azure a run for its money when you start talking it versus Power BI, or it using Power BI to leverage data that you built inside of Azure. When the time comes that you can use the Google Public Cloud Analytics Engine to rationalize your data inside of Azure Public Cloud, that to me, that's a super cool thing. Because I don't think anybody has the power of a search engine like these guys do.
I'll let you guys in on a quick little tip. The GCP Meetup organizer is in the room.
Oh. GCP Meetup guy. Hey!
Holla.
Oh.
So to tack on to what Barter just said, we don't have a stance on GCP. I personally think that GCP is a very strong contender. I think that they have a horrible marketing team, but I think they have an amazing engineering team, and I don't know enough about it simply because of the fact that my customers aren't asking me about it. I'm very much customer driven and customer focused. So if somebody's asking questions about a particular thing, I go and learn about it. And we haven't gotten a lot of customer interest in it yet, with the exception of large ed. And they've already got their hands wrapped around it to begin with. So
Right.
So when they're asking us questions, we lean on internal GCP expertise that we don't normally have to tap.
Right.
So another question that let me flip it back
Questions
over.
from the
Is there any questions from the floor?
Oh, got one up here.
Rock it out.
Hello. This is
Hello.
Nancy.
Hi.
Can you compare and contrast the two products for FedRAMP and MillSuite compliance?
Oh, great question.
I
Great
can't.
question. Chris can't.
No,
It's too many letters. He can't spell them.
it's true.
It's true. So what's
Poor guy.
interesting, I will tell you that Microsoft, from a FedRAMP perspective, has an entire site dedicated to understanding how all public cloud entities that Microsoft owns, whether it be EMS, Office 365, or Azure, is in compliant with FedRAMP standards. To the point where they go far enough to, if you need to get into a DoD environment, you can literally purchase segmented data rack inside of the Microsoft data centers so that you have physical segmentation to be able to meet that standard. The interesting point, too, to note is that data, as far as everybody is concerned, that sits and is required by law to be audited through the FedRAMP standards, Microsoft doesn't ever look at it. They don't own it. They will go to the Supreme Court and have several times in the last 5 or 6 years, and won every time when they have been asked to provide data. Their stance is you go back to the customer. You want the data, you go to the customer. It's not our data, it's their customer. We're just providing a platform for them to land it on. So at the end of this, I can share with Calvin the links to go look at the Microsoft Security Center that's out there and see all the various standards, whether it's GDPR, FedRAMP, whether it's DoD, whether it's HIPAA, FERPA, you name it. They have position statements on all of those, and that talk specifically to how their technology meets the auditor's standards. And that way, you can, as you make a decision to jump into public cloud, you can go in understanding where Microsoft's stance is on it, what holes may exist, and why that might shift you over to another public cloud platform. Heaven forbid you do that.
You just can't say AWS, can you?
I can't say it. I'm never going to say it.
You're very intractable.
It kills me.
Did that actually answer your question? You were asking for a compare and contrast between FedRAMP and MilSpec?
Well, I think the missing part here is what's AWS's stance with FedRAMP currently.
Right.
In
Well,
cloud.
So to be perfectly transparent, I can't answer that. Normally, what I'll do in an event like that is I'll go Google it. But no, that's not true.
Oh no, it's true.
I can get the answer. So one of my best friends is actually the AWS partner SA for GovCloud, and I can supply you with reams of data on exactly what you want to drill down into. If you want to ping us after this to.
So we'll put a wrap up. We typically send an email after the event with the recording link. If you guys can include those kinds of links for us,
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Yeah,
we will do that.
For sure.
Yeah, and obviously just contact us directly if you want any clarity on anything that we touch on.
Other questions from the floor? Nancy, thank you for the question. We appreciate it.
I've got a quick question. I got it one. So I'm an AWS user, not necessarily an Azure user. And I can tell you that when AWS announces a feature, you stay away from it with at least a 100-foot pole until a certain point in time where it has actual users. Is this the same case with Azure, or do they release things as kind of the beta when they say it's ready to go? I mean, Chris, you can kind of tell me I'm full of you know what, but I think this is true. Like they early release some stuff to the general public before it's ready.
I think that I think to be perfectly honest, I think that both clouds kind of have a tendency to release things a little bit prematurely, and that's kind of a that's I know where you're coming from with that. I often find that in its first iteration, the AWS services have a lot that leave to be desired, and from the Azure side, I've seen that as well. I think that the Azure side releases a little bit better baked, not necessarily fully baked, but not quite as raw, simply because they've been around for as long as they have, and they have a raft of use cases, and they have a very strong partner ecosystem that AWS, because of its infancy in comparison to Microsoft, simply doesn't have. Would you say that's an accurate statement, Mr. Barter?
Yeah, I mean, I believe Microsoft makes it very clear that when you are in public preview for a product of theirs, it's truly public preview. I would tell you that it is 90% baked when it comes out to public preview, and there are times where part of what you're getting may be a change in the service delivery, and not so much the actual functionality of it. And then when it goes to GA, it's really just how is it serviced, and how is that servicing mechanism adapted to the Azure platform or to Office 365 or whatever. I think you'll see in Office 365 they do less of that. They jam that thing out there, and it's, if you look at it, it's the periodic table of elements for Office 365 right now, whereas 3 years ago there was 8 things that you got, and now you're up to 20 plus items inside of that enclave. When the Azure platform is very specific, and when you look inside of there, they do make it pretty clear to you that you're using, so take for instance, Data Lake Gen 1. Data Lake Gen 1, there's lots of people that have used it, lots of people that are using the storage attached to it. As they've released Data Lake Gen 2, they have been very clear that legacy platforms, legacy implementations built on Gen 1 need a restructure to go to Gen 2. It hasn't been just, hey, migrate over here. Microsoft tries, because it's a developer-driven community, they're trying to help each other. They're not necessarily just throwing it out there for commercial release and hopefully someone buys it.
All right. So
Can we,
since
can we get one more question from the crowd? Do you think before we
Yeah, go.
Or-
Sure.
No, knock yourselves out. Ask away.
I was about to yell
All
at
right.
Barter for the 90%, but
All right, we got one right
Hey.
here. Right here.
we'll do it afterwards.
Hi, my name's Tommy. I got a couple of questions. We talked a lot about infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, but I know a little bit about AWS. And a lot of times when we look at microservices, we look at decoupling our architecture, and then we use like SQS to do like stateful message transfer or SMS. Does the Microsoft have an API exposure type service offering like that? You talked about Kubernetes as like building it on your own containers, but yeah. Anyway.
So to answer your question, Tommy, the answer is yes. It's probably the simplest question I've been asked today. There, as far as I am aware, and there are a few thousand options inside of Azure at this point, and I say few thousand, somewhere north of a couple thousand different feature releases inside of it. Everything that is app dev, DevOps, anything related to that, it's all API releasable.
Great, thank you. Oh, and one other question too. Do you have time for one more?
Yeah, go.
We can do it.
With pricing, do you guys have something similar with Spot, where you can like spin up like a really badass instance just to do some testing?
I can spin you up a SQL server that has 160 cores, more disk than you can shake a stick at, and cost you about $12,000 a month if you wish to do that.
No, he was asking about Spot.
Spot.
I would. Sheesh, that's a good question. Spot. Ooh.
So I'm sharing with
What
you
would that-
a little
where is
internal thing. Do we have Spot?
I
on
don't
the
know that
list?
it does.
With Spot pricing, you can really cut your cost down to like 30%.
Yeah. So what
yes,
Microsoft does is called
VM.
reserved instance or priority VMs. We call it reserved instance. So you can cut your cost by 70%.
Well,
and
they have that in AWS too, though.
Yeah.
They got
So
1 year and 3 year reservations.
Yeah, so they don't have necessarily Spot in the manner in which you're talking. Their VMs are staged like AWS as far as sizes go, but I'm not so sure that you're going to get into it and look and say, hey, there's a $50 VM for this.
See, the big thing with the Spot is you can just spin up a cloud formation and then just say, I need that really badass backend just for this test for a 30-minute bench test. And once you spin it up, it's up for the time that it runs, and then you can spin it down, but you're going to pay the premium service to have you spin that up. If it's a $12,000 service, that percentage of time based on the 744-hour split and what you use, you're going to get billed at that premium rate. There isn't necessarily that test. Hey, I just need it for a minute.
So there is a thing in Azure called the low priority VM.
Yeah, that's not necessarily the same thing.
Is it not the same thing?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So GCP does have a thing called Spot instances.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like it. Okay.
Yeah, Azure does not that I'm aware of. At least I haven't seen it yet. But then again, like I said, there's a couple thousand things inside of there and adding more every day. They add at the rate of about 300 features a month.
Yeah. Wait till reInvent.
What is Amazon? What's Amazon's rate of new features per month?
Amazon, the rate of features, no idea. I know that when we go to reInvent, we are immediately bloodshot and gobsmacked after the end of Sunday night. So the rate of change per day, I don't have a metric for.
Yeah. All right. Any one last quick burning question from the crowd?
Pick AWS. AWS is the answer to everything.
No. See, I am the smarter one. Pick Azure.
Not. He's shorter.
I can spell it.
And way less good looking. I'm sorry, what?
Not true.
All right. I want to thank David and Chris for joining us today from their respective locations. Let's give them all a big round of applause.
Thanks, everybody.